Craving your next action-packed adventure? Audible delivers thrills of every kind on your command, like Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, where a lone astronaut must save humanity from extinction, narrated with stunning intensity by Ray Porter. From electrifying suspense and daring quest to spine-tingling horror and romance in far-off realms, unleash your adventurous side with gripping titles that'll keep you guessing. Discover exclusive Audible originals, hotly anticipated new releases, and must-listen bestsellers that hook you from the first minute. Because Audible knows there's no greater thrill than the one that speaks to you. Discover what lies beyond the edge of your seat. Start your free 30-day trial at audible.com/WonderyUS. That's audible.com/WonderyUS.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 30 of the True Crime All the Time Unsolved podcast. I'm Mike Ferguson, and with me, as always, is my partner in true crime, Mike Gibby Gibson. Gibbs, what's up?
Gibby Gibson. What happened to Gibberama? Gibster.
I just go with Gibby. Sometimes or Gib or Gibby.
Yeah.
If you want a new nickname, all you have to do is tell me.
No, I'm
not going with Gibberama, though.
I'll just stick with hashtag Team Gibby.
Hashtag Team Gibby.
Yeah.
That's the best one out there.
I'm doing good, man.
All right, good. Good to hear. So let's start out with Patreon supporters. We've got some new ones. Danielle Longamore, Prash Ganendran. We have Jessica V, Buffy Brown, Terry Sweatnam, Haley Porter, and then I went back into the archives, Gibbs, to find one of our supporters that's been with us a long time.
Still waiting for you to find that sound effect. When you go into
the vault.
Yes.
Opening up the vault.
Yeah.
And this week, we're going to give a big shout out to Sarah Brower. She's been with us from very early on. And Sarah, we appreciate it. We appreciate everybody.
We do. We really do.
The new folks that have just joined, we appreciate all the people that continue to support us month after month. It really means the world to us.
Y'all are awesome.
Yep, no doubt about that. So, Gibby, new episode of True Crime All the Time is out.
Yeah.
And
went abroad.
Yeah, we went abroad over to England. And we're talking about the Yorkshire Ripper. Very interesting case. I mean, obviously a bad dude.
Bad dude.
Killed people with a hammer.
Yeah.
Which is not something that we see a lot of.
Personal, brutal.
But part of what makes this case so fascinating, I mean, number one is that it's one of the biggest investigations that they've ever had over there. And then number two, how the investigation was handled. Because the police get a ton of backlash when everything's said and done. Now, you're talking armchair quarterback, but there are some things that, to be honest, you have to look back and say, they could have caught this. They could have caught that.
Yeah.
They had the clues. They just couldn't put it all together.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what our listeners from England have to say about this one.
I think it's a pretty well-known case. I didn't know a whole lot about it. I'd heard the name, but in researching it, I think over there, it's one of their bigger serial killer cases.
Sure.
So I want to talk a little bit about two new podcasts. One is, the first is Criminology, and that's a podcast that I'm doing with Mike Morford. The first episode of Criminology is out right now.
Get it on iTunes.
You can get it on iTunes. You can get it on Android. Go out, subscribe, listen to this first episode. The whole season is about the unsolved case of the Zodiac. So if you're listening to Unsolved right now,
yeah,
it should be right up your alley. And then the second one, I haven't talked about yet, Gibbs, and this is a brand new podcast called Sex, Love, and Murder that I'm doing with Aphrodite Jones.
Big name.
Yeah, big name. True Crime with Aphrodite Jones. She's had a number of shows. She's written a number of books. And the first episode is coming out next Saturday. But the introduction is out there now. So go out, have a listen, subscribe to that as well, and see what you think. We have a couple of voicemails that will play at the end of the show. But for now, Gibbs, I think we have to get into our case.
Yeah, we're going to travel up north.
We're going outside the United States on this one, too.
Yeah.
And we're going up to Canada. We're talking about the Highway of Tears. And the Highway of Tears is basically a stretch of about 500 miles of Highway 16 that runs between Prince George and Prince Rupert, British Columbia. Now, this 500-mile stretch is a section of the Trans-Canada Yellowhead Highway, and it's also known as the Park to Park Highway. And it spans, we're talking a long ways. It spans across British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba.
That's quite a bit.
Yeah. This is a very, very long stretch of road. A lot of it runs through Canada's thick wilderness. We're talking about abundant wildlife, bears, gorgeous scenery, a lot of beautiful, clean rivers. You got a lot of salmon up there. This is pretty country.
Yeah, place you think we would go camping.
Yeah, I'd like to go on vacation up there.
Yeah,
camping.
Until we dig in a little bit.
Well, that's probably going to sour me on it a little bit because of what we know has happened over the years. But it doesn't change the fact that there is some gorgeous country up there. So there is a number of municipalities and actually 23 First Nation communities that border or, kind of intersect with the Highway of Tears. And I think we have to explain what the First Nations kind of entails, Gibbs, because people in Canada are going to know for sure what it is.
Absolutely.
I don't know how many people in the United States and in other countries will.
Especially if you're in the southern part of the U.S., right? Maybe if you border up against Canada, you know.
I would agree. But I think it's something, as we're talking about the story, to give as much detail and to the listener. So the First Nations are the predominant Aboriginal peoples of Canada south of the Arctic.
Correct.
So these municipalities and communities that we're talking about that border or run through the Highway of Tears, there's a lot of poverty in some of these. There's a definite lack of public transportation.
In some of these areas, it only runs once a day.
Which I would think would make it really hard to coordinate a schedule.
Yeah, you might be able to get where you need to be, but you're going to have to find a different way home.
Yeah, I think it would be tough. But what that has done, it's forced a lot of people to turn to hitchhiking as their form of transit.
And that's big in this area. A lot of hitchhiking.
And I think it's a central theme to this case, right? Hitchhiking. Police list the number of Highway 16 victims at 19, but there are a lot of people, Gibbs, and a lot of groups that think this number is well over 40. And specifically when you talk about these Aboriginal organizations, the First Nations and all of this, they definitely believe it's much higher.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And a big reason for that is because they think that there's a lot of women who have disappeared, but because they disappeared a little bit farther away from the highway, they're not being counted. But they think it's part of the same problem along this highway.
And I would agree.
13 of the 19 victims were teenagers, and 10 of the 19 were women of Aboriginal descent. Most were hitchhikers, which is why we made a big deal talking about lack of public transportation and that a lot of people had to turn to hitchhiking.
Absolutely.
And then we have to talk about the time span, because this killing spree that we're talking about runs from 1969 all the way to today.
Yeah, so 48 years.
It is a massive time span for this type of case. But let's talk about why the time span is so long. I think there's a lot of reasons for that, Gibbs. First of all, this area of Canada that we're talking about, large area, but
right,
it's almost a perfect, I want to choose my words carefully here, but it's almost a perfect area for a killer.
So being rural, being heavily wooded, isolated really from what we would consider, a decent population, right? I mean, I think you could go on this highway and not see anybody for miles and miles and miles.
Well, and to that point, though, think about if you do see someone and that someone is a hitchhiker, you pull over to give them a ride, you're in the middle of nowhere, we'll call it. That's probably not a great term to use, but you know what I mean. How hard is it to kill someone and dispose of a body along this highway when you could pull off and be in the woods? You may not see somebody for quite some time.
Well, that's it. I mean, when we dive into the trying to figure out how this all happened, we could talk about it then, but you're right. I mean, if you want the perfect crime and you're commuting across this highway, no one's around, they can't see the connection between you and that person when you pick them up. You do what you do, and then because no one saw you pick them up, and if you're careful about what you do, you know what? You can pretty much just pull over when no one's around and roll the body out and keep on going. No one's going to know any different.
Well, and I think that leads us into talking about what type of killer or killers could this be? Because that's a big part of the conversation.
It is.
Right? Very unlikely, not impossible, but very unlikely that this is one person.
And I agree with that.
I think it's almost been proven at this point that almost impossible for this to be the work of one person. But what you could have, Gibbs, is you could have a single killer that just killed one time.
Yeah.
You could have a number of serial killers operating throughout the years in this space.
Yeah, either it's copycat or competitive serial killers.
Right, either one. And we know you have to bring up truckers. Not giving truckers a bad name. We have a lot of truckers that listen to our podcast.
Yeah.
But we also know that there have been a lot of killers that have used that mobility, we'll say, as a way to pick somebody up, do something bad to a person, and then drive down the road and dump them somewhere else, right? When you're that transient or you move that much, and like you said, there is no connection. It's not like you know this person. There's nothing tying you to this person. They're just somebody on the side of the road that is trying to hitchhike and get a ride. It makes it very tough for investigators to try to solve some of these murders.
And if you were living in town and you were smart about it, then you could try to make it look like one of these. I mean, that's what I would do. I would try if I was that type of person.
Right. Make sure that's the key word. But I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense because you're seeing things on the news and you have for years and years. Everybody knows that this is occurring. This is not a deep, dark secret. And so if you were a person that said, you woke up one day and said, I want to kill somebody, this would be the perfect opportunity, I would think, because you know how the other ones have occurred. You could make it look like, oh, this is just another, I don't want to say just another, like it's, I'm not demeaning but any of these people.
Yeah, this fits the same pattern of all the other ones out here.
There's just so many different ways that these murders could have been committed by a whole host of different people.
Yeah. And like we talked about, because of the limited public transportation, because of the need to find any job that they can get, they will travel by foot, right? I mean, these citizens of these communities are going to hitchhike. And even though there are billboards that say, do not hitchhike in fear of your life, right? That's not going to stop them from doing it. And that makes them easy opportunity.
No, I agree with you. And to be honest with you, I would be very surprised if the number is only 19.
And I think that's why when the First Nations talk about the number has to be in that 40 range, I agree with them. I think it does have to be that high just because.
Well, you mentioned 48 years.
Right.
So 19 victims, that's a lot. 19 people lost their life, no doubt about that. But if you look at it over the span of 48 years, it's not even one person every 2 years.
Right.
And in a situation like this, I just think that there's a lot more going on. They're just not being, because we know there's a lot more murders.
Oh, yeah.
It's just whether or not you classify them as being part of this group that is known as the Highway of Tears.
Yeah, because if you look at just the First Nations, I mean, they're say just across Canada, right, that there are over 4,200 either missing or murdered Aboriginal women. That's a huge number.
It's a lot.
Now, to try to correlate it into the Highway of Tears, I mean, that makes it a little bit difficult to do.
It's all semantics, because you just mentioned 4,200, and you say they were all women?
Yes.
Aboriginal women.
First Nations, yeah.
Lost their life. I don't know what the time span is.
Missing or murdered.
Missing or murdered. And so when I say semantics, it's just really, how you're classifying them.
Right.
Whether you're classifying them in this group or you're classifying them in another, it doesn't change the fact that these women are missing and murdered. And over the years, Gibbs, at certain points in time, they've had as many as 75 officers dedicated to trying to find the killer or killers. And like we talked about, I think the police are pretty certain that they're not looking for one person. They're looking for a number of different killers because of the time frame, because the number of miles that this highway stretches. We're about ready to start talking about victims, and we don't have a ton of information on every one. What we do know is that the majority of the victims had been sexually assaulted and murdered, and these attacks, they're pretty brutal. So Gibbs, I think the best way to do it is to talk about the victims in the order that they went missing, going all the way back to 1969. And again, what we're talking about are the victims that police have categorized as being part of this Highway of Tears.
Yes.
So the first victim is Gloria Moody. She was 26 years old. She was last seen on October 25th, 1969, leaving a bar in Williams Lake. Her body would be found in some woods around a cattle ranch about 6 miles away from where she was last seen. So next we have to talk about Micheline Pear. And I hope I'm pronouncing that name right, Gibbs. I'm worried that I'm not going to get some of these right. I hate that because they're victims. She was 18 years old and she went missing in 1970, last seen on Highway 29 at the gates of Tompkins Ranch. And this is situated between Fort St. John and Hudson's Hope. And how this fact is known is because there were two women that had given her a ride that were later able to say that they had dropped her off at that point. And then there's nobody else that has ever seen her again. So from 1970, we have to jump up to 1973. And Gibbs, this is where I go back to us talking about the fact that the number is probably more than 19, because if you have multiple serial killers and this and that, are they really taking these big long stretches in time off? Now, as we move forward, I could see where you have a serial killer operating. That serial killer either gets incarcerated, dies, whatever it is. Then you have a stretch of time before somebody else comes along. I could see that.
Sure.
But again, there's so many different ways and scenarios that this could have taken place. It's really hard to figure out. Gail Ways was 19 years old. She disappeared in October of 1973, and she was hitchhiking from Clearwater to Kamloops. Her body would be found in a ditch on Highway 5 just south of Clearwater. The very next month, now keep in mind, we haven't had anybody disappear or let's say that's categorized as part of this group for 3 years. And now we have women disappear in back-to-back months because Pamela Darlington, also 19 years old, she vanished from Kamloops while hitchhiking to a local bar. Her body would be found the very next day. So I think the fact, Gibbs, that Kamloops is central to both of these disappearances
Yeah.
tells you something that happens 1 month, after the other. So now we're into 1974, August. Colleen McMillan is 16 years old. She was last seen leaving her home in Lackahatchee to hitchhike to a nearby friend's house. Colleen's remains would be found the following month. And in December, you have Monica Ignis. She was only 14, and she was believed to be going home from school when she was last seen on December 13th, 1974, and she was last seen in Thornhill, British Columbia. Her body would not be found until April 6, 1975, east of Terrace. They determined that Monica had been strangled.
So, Mike, the next victim happens to be the youngest victim.
Oh, this is a tough one.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Monica Jack, only 12 years old. Very, very, I mean, they're all tough, but we know Gibbs, the younger the victim, it just makes it even tougher.
Yeah, it really does. I have a hard time with it.
And Monica Jack disappeared in 1978, and no one would know what happened to her for a full 17 years.
That's crazy. Longer than
17 years.
Yeah.
5 years longer than she had been alive.
Yeah.
That's unbelievably sad. And what happened was in June of 95, some forestry workers found a set of skeletal remains in a ravine just off a logging road on Swacum Mountain. And this spot where they found Monica Jack's body was about 20 kilometers from where they had found her bike sometime earlier. They had to use dental records and DNA testing to confirm her identity.
So what happened to her, absolutely terrible. Terrible for the family. But if anything, at least now the family has some sense of resolution.
Yeah, I mean, I think being missing for 17 years, imagine what that does to a family, not knowing what happened to your precious little 12-year-old girl who, at that point in time, Gibbs would have been 29 years old.
Yeah.
When her body's found. But that 17-year period, that had to have been
tormenting,
incredibly hard on the family. Now, it's not going to be easy to deal with the fact that she's found and you start to understand what happened to her.
Right.
But, and I don't know, Gibbs, we haven't gone through this, so we can only kind of talk and theorize. But at that point, so is it better? I'll ask it as a question instead. Is it better not knowing and having that hope still alive? Because I think you could look at it a couple of different ways.
Yeah, and I wonder if that shifts as years go by. I wonder if it early on, I think it's better.
It's all hope.
Hope, yes. And then 10 years down the road, maybe you're thinking, please just give me any answer at this point, even if it's not the answer I want to hear. You know, I just don't know. Like you said, unless you're in those shoes, we'll never know.
And I think it probably varies from individual to individual, I would think. I can imagine that some people would rather have the hope alive for as long as they can, with the alternative being that they know for sure that their loved one was murdered.
Yeah. And we know, I mean, there have been victims found 10, 15, even longer, right?
You know, J.C. Dugard, the girls up in Cleveland. I mean, there's a lot of examples where you would think people are way past the point in terms of number of years that they've been missing that they'll ever be found, and they're found. So then as far as the timeline, Gibbs, we have another 3-year lull because it's not until 1981 that Maureen Mosey, she's 33 years old, it's thought that she was hitchhiking from Salmon Arm to Kamloops. She's last seen on May the 8th, 1981. Her body would be found the very next day by a woman walking her dog along a road right off the Trans-Canada Highway, and this was about 16 kilometers east of Kamloops. Maureen had been severely beaten to death. So in this case, Gibbs, and in some other ones we've talked about, the body is found a day later. But we just talked about one where someone's body is not found for 17 years.
So on the cases where the body's found off the highway, fairly deep into the woods, my thought is that that's probably somebody more local because they have that knowledge base. Whereas if I was commuting from one town to the other, truck driver, whatever, I would just kind of roll them out onto the ditch off the highway or something like that. I wouldn't go very far down any offshoots.
No, I think what you're saying is very valid. How much information can you glean about what type of killer we're talking about from where they dumped the body? Because I'll add on a little bit, Gibbs, and say, if I don't know the area all that well, off the beaten path, and I've got a body in my car, how far am I willing to venture off knowing that I don't really know where I'm going?
Yeah, I think you'd be careful.
Maybe you'd be taking more of a chance as opposed to I'm on the main highway. I can see for miles and miles. There's nobody coming ahead of me, behind me. I have time to unload a body and dump it pretty, close to the road. And then I'm off.
Yeah, and if there's no connection between you and the victim, I mean, that works well.
I mean, the only thing you have to worry about in a situation like that is, forensic evidence, transference, DNA, fibers, all that type of stuff.
The chances of even fibers coming back to you, if no one saw you in the area picking up this person,
that's true.
It's still going to be hard for them to tie anything back to you ever.
Yeah, you're right. Fiber evidence probably not going to do very much at all if they don't know who you are.
Yeah.
The only thing that would be DNA.
Right.
And that would have to mean you were in a database somewhere, or fingerprints that could get you that way. We're not trying to tell people how to get away with it. We're trying to talk about, what does this mean as far as what information can you glean to give you insight into what type of killer could this be?
Yeah, because what's the difference between what happened to Monica and what happened to Maureen?
Yeah, I think the only difference is, number one, they were 3 years apart. So that in itself, to me, lends a greater chance that they were killed by two different people, just the time frame. And then it's, I don't know exactly where it was, but, when I think of kind of a remote logging road, I think somebody took very special care in where they put the body, as opposed to when you look at Maureen Mosey, the very next day somebody finds it. It's just right off the highway. That was, nobody took care or really gave a lot of planning into where they were going to dispose of the body. It was, like you said, stop somewhere on the highway and right there is where it's going to be.
Yeah, because they weren't concerned.
It's a whole nother 2 years, 1983, that we're talking about Shelly Ann Basque. She was 16 years old. She went missing from Hinton, Alberta, and several days after she went missing, some of her personal items were found. Some of her clothing was found near a river, and what they also found was some drops of blood that matched her blood type. So again, Gibbs, I don't know what you do with that evidence or what it says. It's not a clear indication to me of anything other than there's a chance that something bad happened.
Yeah, maybe a struggle occurred.
But it's not definitive because they know it's her blood type. It's not, if it was somebody else's, alongside of it, then maybe they'd have something to go on. So we're talking about stretches of time. And now we have a 6-year lull in between. Now, you and I don't probably believe there's really a 6-year lull. I think things are happening in between the ones we're talking about. I truly do.
Yeah, I do too.
After all the research and everything we've looked at, I'm not willing to believe that there's only 19 victims. I'm just not. But Alberta Williams, she was 24 years old. Her body was found September 25th, 1989, east of Prince Rupert, and she had been found strangled and sexually assaulted. The same year, Cecilia Ann Nickel, 15, goes missing from Smithers, BC. She was reported as last being seen in Smithers near Highway 16. It gives very tragic, 15 years old. But what happens is that just a year later, her cousin, Delphine Nickel, goes missing as well.
Yeah, that's bizarre. I mean, tragic for the families. man, I can't imagine.
Unbelievable.
Double whammy there.
She goes missing from Smithers as well.
Exactly.
She vanished on June 13th, 1990. So what police know is that Delphine was hitchhiking from the town of Smithers back to her home in Telqua. So you have Cecilia and Delphine, cousins. They go missing in subsequent years, and they've never been found. So back to your point, Gibbs, I mean, one person in a family, horrible tragedy. Now you've got a second person the next year. I can't even fathom it.
No, well, I can't either. I mean, if they both went missing at the same time, I guess then people would say, well, maybe they ran away.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But when you have a year gap like that.
So you have to look at that. Is it an unbelievable coincidence that two cousins are on this list of only 19 people, go missing a year apart, or is there something more to it? Did they go missing for some other reason because they are linked? I don't know. You can look at it a bunch of different ways. If it's the first one, that is a hell of a coincidence.
Yeah.
It's an unbelievable coincidence. It really is. So the next victim is Ramona Wilson, 16 years old, and this is 1994, but we're still talking about Smithers, British Columbia. And Ramona was hitchhiking to her friend's home, and her friend lived in Smithers, June 11th, 1994. Her remains are ultimately found in April of 1995. So almost a whole year before they find her body, and they find it close to the Smithers airport. And you know, Gibbs, as many episodes as we've done, that amount of time, the decomposition is going to be very, very severe. And Ramona's mother can really only identify that it was her clothes. She knows that the clothes that were found is what Ramona was wearing.
Yeah, I mean, to the point, Ramona's mom talks about how she was called to the police station, and when she walks into the one room, they just have her daughter's clothes hanging up, and immediately when she sees it, she knows, and she confirms.
Ramona's body is found a little more than half a kilometer off the highway. It was later determined that she had been sexually assaulted and that her murder was particularly brutal. But police have theories on this one. And one of them is that Ramona's killer may have been more of a local type person. And it kind of goes back to what you and I were talking about before, Gibbs. I think one of the reasons why they think that is because the killer took quite a bit of time traversing through a forest in order to find a place to leave Ramona's body. And I think it's two things, right? One is that they think maybe the killer knows the area, but then the second, and I think maybe you and I touched on it, was that this is somebody that has some type of connection to the victim. And because of that, they don't want this person found, or they don't want them found quickly when there's a lot more evidence.
Yeah, so they're at that point, they're, like you said, they're willing to traverse through the forest.
So there's going to be a total of 3 victims to go missing in the year of 1994. And I think that says something, Gibbs, because we haven't had, these have been stretched out, right? They go all the way back to 1969. Now you have 3 of the 19 that go missing in 1994 alone. That's where I get in the area of, is that a serial killer that starts to operate? Because we went from 1990 when we were talking about Delphine. Now 94 was Ramona Wilson. Also in 94, Roxanne Thiara, she went missing in Prince George in July.
So yeah, I mean, I think this is when you can start cutting away and boxing some things together, right? And saying these probably belong to one potential suspect.
I agree with you, but then it does kind of contradict what we said about the police's theory about Ramona Wilson's killer. So again, you can go back and forth on these, trying to figure them out.
Well, true.
The one thing about Roxanne is it was known that she had worked as a sex worker, and before she went missing, she had told a friend that she was going to meet a customer. So this is a little different. And she was last seen walking around a building. She disappeared from view from someone, and that was it. That was the last time anyone saw her. Her body was found August 17th, 1994, in some brush along Highway 16. It's about 6 kilometers east of Burns Lake. So again, Gibbs, I go back to my theory of lumping in 3 women that go missing in 94, but then I catch myself because the first 2, one is dumped in a very particular way back in the forest, and then the second one is basically right along the highway.
Yeah, makes you think.
It's tough to make sense of.
Yeah.
It. So the third, and I have to say girl, these are girls, Gibbs. We're talking about 15, 16-year-old.
Yeah, I mean, they're all
very
young. I mean, the oldest one being Maureen, she was 33. But besides that, they're all teenagers.
And that's another thing that you and I talk about when you're talking about unsolved cases and murderers. We always talk about having a type, and you have to include in type the age of the victim. Is it a coincidence that a lot of these girls are less than 20 years old, 15, 16? Is that a type of somebody? So Alicia Germain, again, only 15 years old. She goes missing from Prince George, and we're still in 1994, and her body would be found December 9th, 1994, behind an elementary school. But this elementary school was not very far off of Highway 16. She had been stabbed to death. So the 16th girl to go missing is Lana Derrick. She goes missing from Terrace in 1995, last seen in October at a service station in Thornhill. She was a student at Northwest Community College there in Terrace. But there's not a lot of information about her.
There really isn't.
She just goes missing. And now, between Lana Derrick to the next victim, Nicole Hoare, she doesn't go missing until 2002. That is a 7-year stretch where no one goes missing. Find it very hard to believe.
Oh, I do too. And I think that's where a lot of the Aboriginal or First Nations leaders say the number's higher because you're not counting everybody that you should be.
They don't feel like they're being their folks that go missing are being represented, right? Would you say that's fair, Gibbs?
I would say very fair.
So Nicole Hoare, she was working in Prince George as a tree planter, and the last time that she was seen was on June 21st, 2002. She was hitchhiking to Smithers on Highway 16. A lot of stuff about Smithers. I'm not that familiar with it, Gibbs, so I don't know how big of a place it is. But a lot of these girls are either leaving or going to Smithers.
So I think the reason that Smithers comes up a lot is it's the halfway point between Prince George and Prince Rupert.
And that would make a lot of sense. Smithers is probably a smaller town, and people are getting to a bigger town or coming back from. That would make sense.
Yeah, good pickup, drop-off location.
So we have another 3-year hiatus until Tamara Chipman, 22 years old. She goes missing from Prince Rupert in 2005, and she was last seen hitchhiking east on Highway 16. So we have a little bit of more information on Tamara because people will come out and say, about her. She was known as very funny. She had a lot of spunk. She was fun to be around. Now, Tamara had a son, and that's very sad.
That is sad.
Not only is she gone, but she left behind a little one that now doesn't have his mom. And then you have to talk about Tamara's aunt, Gladys Radek, because Gladys has been doing a lot of organizing for the First Nations women. Again, Gibbs, as we talked about, they don't feel like they've been properly represented. But on top of that, they also believe that some of these murders, especially involving Aboriginal women, have a racial component. There's a motivation there that is racially driven. And Gladys has an amazing story because she also came face to face with a serial killer in the 1970s by the name of Clifford Olson. She was hitchhiking. Clifford Olson picked her up, and Clifford Olson was a really bad guy. I mean, he sexually assaulted and murdered at least 11 boys and girls back in those days. He attacked Gladys. They struggled, and somehow she was able to break free of this Clifford Olson, and she took off running, eventually was picked up by an older couple and saved. That's an amazing story.
That is an amazing story. I mean, it truly is. And to survive that, that's just... But then have to go through what her niece missing and wondering if the outcome is going to be something similar.
So the next year in 2006, the body of Ilea Sarek Auger, she was only 14 years old, was found shortly after she went missing on February 2nd. A motorist found her body in a ditch off Highway 16 near Tabor Mountain. And this is about 20 kilometers east of Prince George. We fast forward to 2010, and we have to talk about Lauren Dawn Leslie. She was 15 years old. She was murdered on November 27th, 2010. And Gibbs, I know we're going to talk a little bit about this one later when we get into suspects. And then the last victim that we'll talk about, Gibbs, and this is number 21. And people are going to say, well, you said there was only 19. And without giving it away, that answer is it's going to become clear when we start talking about suspects. And a couple of these women, they now know who was responsible for their death. But we'll talk about that when we get into suspects. So Madison Scott, she was 20 years old. Madison Scott was last seen during the early morning hours of May 28, 2011 at Hogsback Lake, which is about 25 kilometers southeast of Vanderhoof. She had attended a party the night before, and police located her truck, but they've never found any evidence of Madison Scott. All right, Gibbs, so let's get into the investigation and some of the potential suspects. We've already talked about the idea of truckers making good suspects, right? And I'm not painting truckers with a broad brush, but that they have the access, they have the ability, they're on the move, they're traveling back and forth between some of these cities that we're talking about on a regular basis.
Well, predominantly that's what you're going to see there, because that's what's servicing those different Prince George to Prince Albert is supply vehicles going back and forth. So that's what you're going to have.
Yeah, it does make a lot of sense. And we've talked a lot about the hitchhiking, and we know that the last time a lot of these girls were seen was hitchhiking.
And you can put billboards up and warn them not to hitchhike. You could tell them as a parent not to hitchhike. But when they're walking on these long stretches, I'm talking miles, right, to go from where they work to home or to visit their friend in these rural areas, guess what? Somebody pulls over and says, hey, honey, you want to ride? They're probably going to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, nobody's going to walk 10 miles to get somewhere when they can jump in a truck and get there in 10 minutes.
Exactly.
So, Gibbs, the thought is that police feel that of the majority of the victims that have been found, it's more than likely that they're looking at some type of serial killer suspect or copycat killer. And I think you and I talked about this, right? No connection to the victims, most likely. That would indicate maybe some type of serial killer.
Mm-hmm.
No witnesses sometimes on these long stretches of roads. Very easy to dump a body on the side of the highway. As a serial killer, you wouldn't need to go into the woods.
No.
And take a lot of time and increase your chances of somebody seeing you if you have no connection whatsoever to the victim.
And this would make it hard for the police. I mean, think about it, right? I mean, they're not going to have a lot of evidence, if any. And like you just said, no witnesses. Man, no wonder this is unsolved.
Yeah, and then on the flip side, when you talk about the victims that are either still missing or that have been found deep inside the forest, like we talked about, is that more of a local killer, knows the area, knows the best place to hide a body because they know the traffic pattern in those areas and the likelihood that somebody is going to stumble upon it. And if that's the case, then chances are that type of killer may have some type of connection to the victim, because why else do that? So those are some of the thoughts I think that police have. The problem is there's very little evidence, very few witnesses, and in some cases, a lot of these cases are very old. We went all the way back to 1969. Every year that goes by makes it just a little bit harder to solve. In 2009, police went to a property in rural Prince George, and they were there to search for the remains of Nicole Hoare. This property was once owned by a man named Leland Vincent Switzer, who is currently serving a prison sentence for the second-degree murder of his brother. Now, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, they searched the property, and obviously, Gibbs, they had to have some type of indication that made them think that Switzer had something to do with the disappearance and possible murder of Nicole Hoare. But after searching the property for her and any evidence of any of the other missing women from the Highway of Tears, nothing really came of it.
Just kind of fizzled out.
It fizzled out. They didn't find anything. I wish I knew more about what led them to focus in on Switzer. In 2012, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police made an announcement about one of the women that had disappeared from the Highway of Tears. And it was a very important finding. They were able to establish a link showing that Bobby Jack Fowler had murdered Colleen McMillan. Colleen went missing all the way back in 1974, and her remains had been found about a month later. But even back in 1974, Gibbs, police had done a really good job of preserving whatever evidence they could find when they found Colleen's body. And they had started trying to compile a DNA profile of the killer as far back as 2007, but the technology just wasn't quite there. And it wasn't until 2012 they were taking a look again at the DNA that they got a match to this guy, Bobby Jack Fowler. Now, we have to talk about Bobby Jack Fowler a little bit. This guy was from the United States, and he had been convicted in 1996 of the kidnapping, assault, attempted rape of a woman in Oregon. Bobby Jack Fowler died 10 years after being convicted in 2006 of lung cancer at the age of 66. Now, Fowler had an unbelievably long record of criminal activity in the United States, and it was known that he had worked in Prince George, BC in the 1970s. Gibbs, that goes back to, kind of what we talked about, right? There are some of the women on the list that they now believe their murders have been solved. Colleen McMillan is one of them.
The RCMP announced today that they finally made a break in one of the 18 cases connected to the Highway of Tears. They indicated that a U.S. man by the name of Bobby Jack Fowler, who died in prison in 2006, has been linked by DNA to Colleen McMillan, who died in 1974 at just 16 years old.
Based on what EPAN investigators know today, Fowler is responsible for the murder of 16-year-old Colleen McMillan.
It has been a long wait for answers, and although it is a somewhat unsatisfactory result, because this individual won't have to stand trial for what he did, we are comforted by the fact that he was in prison when he died, and that he can't hurt anyone else.
Bobby Jack Fowler, who was born and spent most of his life in the U.S., has an extensive, violent, and criminal history with convictions in several American states for crimes including attempted murder, assault with a dangerous weapon, sexual assault, arson, kidnapping, attempting sexual assault, and firearms offenses. We have been able to create a timeline for Fowler's movements over the past 40 years, but it is not complete. Our challenge has been determining with certainty Fowler's history here in British Columbia. We know that Fowler worked in the Prince George area in 1974 for a roofing company called Happy's Roofing. The company no longer in business and their records no longer exist. He worked odd jobs in areas like roofing and general labor. He stayed and lived in motels or rented. He liked old cars and he drove until they quit. He frequented bars and restaurants and was violent towards men and women and picked up hitchhikers. In order to help us determine Bobby Jack Fowler's movements, we need the public's help.
It's amazing that they had somehow got DNA still from 1974 enough or kept it in good enough shape to be able to match it up to this Bobby Jack Fowler.
It's amazing, actually.
It really is. Because, I mean, I think you and I have talked about cases that are not nearly that old where the evidence has been degraded past the point where they were able to get a good workup.
Yeah, for whatever reason, this was preserved perfectly.
And actually, I want to play a clip of Colleen's brothers talking about what an amazing job the Canadian police did.
It was the innocence that was lost in that whole area. Nothing even remotely close to this had ever happened to anyone in our
community.
In our community, yeah.
It was just so far out of the realm of normal experience that, to be honest, it never occurred to me that it could happen to me. Just because it was so strange and foreign.
Yeah. Unfortunately, in those 70s, people looked upon those type of things differently than they do now. You know, as far as getting counseling and that type of thing. It wasn't something you talked about back then. You just sort of tried to forget about it and move ahead with your life.
Just a very unusual thing to have happen, and you got to just forge ahead, make your way through, and move on to the next phase of your life. And both of us have reflected back as adults, thinking, like, wow, how did we even get through that?
Yeah. Thank God that evidence was preserved the way it was all these years. The RCMP did a fantastic job in those days, and what they had was amazing. Just simply amazing how it all transpired.
But Colleen McMillan is not the only victim that we talked about that Fowler may be responsible for, because he's strongly suspected in a couple more at least. So the first victim is Gail Ways, and the second victim is Pamela Darlington. And this makes a lot of sense, Gibbs, because if you remember, we talked about them very early on. They both disappeared in 73, and they disappeared 1 month apart from each other. And they both disappeared not that long before Colleen McMillan.
Yeah, and I think they disappeared in the general same area.
Yeah, so, I mean, that is why they are looking at Fowler as a possibility for those two as well. The problem is, if they don't have the same type of DNA that they had in the case of Colleen McMillan, Fowler's dead, not going to get anything out of him. It's going to be up to technology or some mystery person coming forward and saying, yes, I know Fowler did it, and here's why.
Right.
Short of that, I don't know how they're ever going to be able to prove it.
I think they have a good case for it, though.
Yeah, no,
to state it.
I think it's probably true, but how do you prove it?
Yeah. And to that point, I think even boxed around those three victims, right, I think some people want to try to throw Fowler into the cause of some other victims on the Highway of Tears, but I think a lot of it's been discounted.
Well, and it makes sense. I mean, all you can do, it's a list. All you can do is try to say, is this possible, right? What else can police do? Now, there's some of them that just by the nature of when they happened, there's no way they could be him, right? When you get into the 1990s, he was arrested in 95. They knew where he was from that point after. And also, I think they have a pretty good idea of his whereabouts of when he was in British Columbia, because he did kill a number of people in the United States as well.
So they've also attached his name to some murders that happened in Oregon that were involved with hitchhikers.
And that's very interesting because that's kind of what we've been talking about. If that speaks to his MO, it just lends even more credence that maybe he did have something to do with some of these murders that we're talking about. Next, Gibbs, I think we have to talk about Cody Legibokov, Canadian serial killer. He was convicted in 2014 for murdering 3 women and a teenage girl. His murders took place between 2009, 2010, all around Prince George. And this is where we get back to Lauren Leslie. She was the 15-year-old that was murdered in 2010, and they tied Cody Legibokov to that murder. He was actually convicted of first-degree murder September 11th, 2014. So that's 2 women, or 2 girls, in the case of Lauren Leslie. So you have Colleen McMillan, Lauren Leslie. Those 2 police have knowledge of who committed their murders. And then we talk about Monica Jack again. She was one that was murdered all the way back in 1978. And Gibbs, she was also the youngest. She was 12 years old.
Yeah, it was rough.
And murder charges were brought against a man named Gary Hanlon for her death in 2014. This Gary Hanlon guy was a serial rapist charged with not only the murder of Monica Jack, but also an 11-year-old girl named Catherine Herbert.
It's a sick dude.
Yeah, we're talking 11 and 12-year-old girls. This guy is a frickin' monster.
Shove my K-bar up his ass.
You should. If that's an option, I vote for that. And there's a lot of people, Gibbs, that have thought that Catherine Herbert should be included in the list of the victims of the Highway of Tears murders. And Gary Hanlon, he was on police radar for quite some time and was a suspect in the deaths of both of these little girls. But they never could get enough evidence to charge him. It wasn't until 2014, as some new advances in DNA came along, that they were able to figure it out. So Gibbs, we have to talk about the list, the victim list, because we talked about it being 19. You'll see it as different numbers in different places. There are some people that think, well, this person should be on, this person shouldn't be on. Some people think it's double, if not more.
I mean, you're here 16, 18, 19.
Yeah,
right. I mean, it's going to jump all over the place.
Depending on where you look, you will see different names. You will see some folks not on there.
The RCMP has been actively investigating the disappearance or murder of a number of women in British Columbia. Project EPANA is a dedicated task force investigating 18 missing or murdered women from 1969 to 2006.
In the RCMP, there's no such thing as a cold case. We work them until we bring a charge, and they're under investigation until that point in time. Right now, we're in the EPANA file room, and contained within this room are approximately 700 boxes, which contains the investigations of the missing and murdered women that are part of our investigation. Each box contains hundreds of suspects, witnesses, all kinds of reports, banking records, dive records, polygraph records, witness statements, and all of this information was put in an electronic database, which is absolutely essential in a project or investigation of this size.
So Gibbs, that was a little clip about EPANA, and this is a project that was launched in 2005 by the RCMP to focus on these unsolved murders and disappearances of all these young women along Highway 16. Part of their aim was to figure out some of the stuff we've been talking about. Was this a single killer? Is this a series of serial killers? Is it a combination of that plus a bunch of one-off killers? So the EPANA team has a specific criteria that they list out for the victims that they're going to investigate. So the criteria is female, participating in a high-risk lifestyle, known to hitchhike, and were last seen or where their bodies were discovered within a mile from Highway 16, Highway 97, or Highway 5. So that's very specific. And again, that's why, so that's their criteria.
Right.
You could make the same argument for what should the criteria be for generating the list of victims? Is it something similar? Can you limit it to victims that were last seen or where their bodies were found within just a mile from Highway 16? It's an interesting debate.
And anytime you're talking about public funds, you're going to have a lot of debate.
And that's a good point because, in some of the years after the project was formed, they were getting about $5 million a year in funding. But within the last couple years, that's dropped to less than $1 million. So obviously the amount of work you can do, testing, investigation, all of that stuff.
Greatly diminishes for sure.
Yeah, it's all based on money. You have to have money to get all that stuff done. At one point, the task force had 70 officers, and in the past couple of years, it's dropped to around 12.
That's a big difference.
Now, they were a big part of solving the murder of Colleen McMillan, right? This EPANA group, as part of the RCMP, was part of that. The other thing that they were part of is the charges brought against Gary Hanlon in the death of 12-year-old Monica Jack. So they have done some good work, and they're still investigating the remaining cases, but with the cuts in funding and all that, I just don't know how much they have to work with. All right, Gibbs, we have to talk about the topic of racism. We kind of touched on it a little bit. I think this is something that definitely comes out of the First Nations community, that the deaths of Aboriginal women are not being treated in the exact same way as non-Aboriginal women.
To the point, there's a quote and it says that media assigns a lesser value to the Aboriginal women in these cases.
So Gibbs, I think what is being said is that it's a combination of the police investigation and the way that the media covers these cases that they have a problem with, right? The Aboriginal people don't feel that the victims from their communities get the same type of coverage from the media, and that the police don't investigate the same way. I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah, so when it comes to the First Nation, one of the things that they cite is the Nicole Hoare case, because it seems that, well, not even seems, she did. She received a lot more media attention, and she also received more investigative resources. And so when they look at that, knowing that Nicole was a Caucasian victim, they were quite upset that the same amount of resources weren't applied to the Aboriginal victims.
They back that up with the fact that Nicole Hoare's case was the first to be covered in a slew of newspapers around Canada. So you can almost point to that, because Nicole Hoare did not disappear until 2002. And this case goes all the way back to 1969, like we keep pointing out. That's a long time. It's pretty hard not to make that correlation and agree with them.
While researching this, I did see an article where they talked about a main political figure made a comment about the fact that all these Aboriginal women missing is a First Nations problem. And to the point, the First Nations came out and said, it's not a First Nations problem, it's a Canadian problem, because we all live in Canada. We are part of the same country. So it's a Canadian problem, not just a First Nations problem. Don't separate us from Canada and just say the First Nation.
Yeah, I'm surprised. I don't know who that was, but I'm surprised they didn't get a ton of backlash off of that. So Gibbs, in wrapping up this case, there have been a number of really good documentaries made. So there's a lot of material out there if people want to, dive a little bit deeper into this case. I mean, it's really big. We could only, I'll call it, kind of skim the surface because it's massive. It extends over, like we said, a long period of time. You have a large number of victims, no matter how you characterize it, who you decide to. That's a little strange when you say, who are you letting in and who are you not? But
I mean, it really does. It journeys into it journeys into some political aspects. It journeys into just branches off in different arenas. So it's hard to cover, like you said, 100% of this case. Plenty out there to research, listen to, watch.
All right, Gibbs. So that's it for the case of the Highway of Tears. Another episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved. Got a couple voicemails. Let's go ahead and play those.
Hey, Mike and Gibby. This is Elisa Watson. I'm a new listener. Just started listening to the True Crime All the Time Unsolved. I listen while I work out. Kind of strange the looks I get, but I'm sure I'm making a lot of gasping faces and eyebrows down at some of these stories. But just want to tell you guys are doing a great job, and I enjoy listening to you at work, on my commute. I listen to you all the time. So thanks a lot, guys. Keep up with the good work. Bye-bye.
She listens all the time, Gibbs.
Lisa, thank you.
True Crime
all the time.
Hey, guys. This is Paula Lima calling you from Vegas. Just wanted to leave you guys a quick message. As you guys already know, you're definitely one of my favorite podcasts out there, and I'm so proud to be a Patreon supporter. You guys have seriously gotten me through my move into my new home, sleepless nights when I can't go back to sleep after the baby wakes me up, not to mention the long monotonous drives, I should say, to and from work, and just day-to-day living. I absolutely look forward to Sundays, and that's mostly because of you guys. The profiles you cover are always interesting and detailed, and I just love learning new things about the crazies out there in the world. I'm a true crime buff. I just adore you two and appreciate the content you guys are putting out, and I especially love the hints of comedy like Mike always aging Gibby, and then Gibby's K-Bar. By the way, very gangster Gibby. Thanks again, you guys, for all that you do. Keep up the great work. I'm staying safe and keeping my own time ticking. You guys do the same.
Love the voicemail from Paula. We have a lot of interaction with her on social media.
We do. She's great.
I mean, Gibby has aged 5 years since we've been taping this episode.
Yeah.
That's what happens when you spend all week researching a case. It's going to age you.
But you know what? I'm gangsta.
You are gangsta.
So back up.
All right. That's it for True Crime All the Time Unsolved. So for Mike
and Gibby,
stay safe and keep your own time ticking.